Josh Fine, welcome to Off the Leash podcast.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you inviting me.
Great. I want to set the scene for our conversation. I think a really good way to do that is to talk about Qatar.
Okay.
You've done some outstanding work throughout your career, and you did some work in Qatar, a report on Qatar's abusive practices for achieving world dominance. This report won an Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Award, which is the broadcast equivalent of a Pulitzer Prize. It was also the first sports segment to win an Overseas Press Club Award. So this report's really important because I think when I think about investigative journalism, it kind of encapsulates a lot of different areas. So to set the scene, I would love for you to talk about your work in Qatar from the lens of a newcomer. I never heard of Qatar before. I don't know anything about it, and you're going to enlighten me about the country.
Well, most people had not heard of Qatar either, and then in what can, I think, only be described as one of the biggest upsets ever in sports, one of the craziest and, it turns out, most corrupt decisions in sport. Qatar in 2010 was awarded the right to host the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Mm-hmm. So at the time, just to set the scene, the countries that were bidding for the 2022 World Cup included the U.S., Australia, I think Spain. I can't remember if Britain's bid was for 2018 or 2022, but you had 4 or 5 countries that were bidding that had like perfect scores on all of the bid sheets that the FIFA committee that goes around to look at it had. So take the U.S., for example. We've got lots of stadiums. We've got lots of hotels. Et cetera, right? And the same is obviously true in Australia and lots of other countries. Qatar had no stadiums. And by no stadiums, I mean literally not one stadium that could host a World Cup game. It's about 120 degrees there in the summer when the World Cup is held. And really no history of soccer. And FIFA's own committee that was looking at the risks of all these different bids had Qatar ranked the lowest on everything. Mm-hmm. So no one thought Qatar had a chance. It seemed like this crazy bid, but yet they won. So we, for many years, I worked at a show on HBO called Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel, a long-form sports investigative show, kind of like 60 Minutes, but loosely about sports. So, we lived, breathed these kinds of stories. We always had our antenna up for stories, and this was, an obvious one, of course. And so, how did Qatar, this tiny, scorching desert state, with no history of soccer, no soccer stadiums, win the right to host the World Cup? So that was kind of the jumping off point for looking at it. And the more we looked, the more we realized there were at least 3 big things going on. And stop me if I'm going on too long or interject.
This is
okay.
Great.
There were at least 3 big things going on. One was that the Qatar had decided to use sports. So what Qatar has is natural gas oil. They have I think the world's largest deposits of liquefied natural gas. So it's an extraordinarily wealthy country by some metrics, the wealthiest country in the world per capita. So what they have is money. What they don't have a lot of is kind of to your exact point, people who had never even heard of the country. So they decide they're going to embark on at least one of the strategies, maybe the key strategy to kind of become a more powerful, more influential country in the world. They decided they were going to use sports as the way to do that. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, one of these was winning the right to host the World Cup, which turned out to be this extraordinarily corrupt thing, which I can get into if you want. The other was that they started basically buying athletes. And so, and this was something that we didn't realize until we started looking at it. And it was fascinating. I mean, they had for many years had gone around the world and basically nationalized athletes from other countries to compete for them. So So they would, for example, in distance running, a lot of the East African countries are very strong in distance running, Kenya, Ethiopia. And they would go to these countries and say to these runners, like, hey, do you want to, instead of running for Kenya, do you want to run for Qatar? And they'd offer them money to do it. And a lot of them, unsurprisingly, said yes. As we showed in the piece, what I always found to be one of the more humorous things, Bulgaria, it turns out, is so good at weightlifting that the guys who don't make the men's weightlifting team on Bulgaria are like the best weightlifters in the world, except for like the B team, the Bulgarian weightlifting B team is better than any other team in the world except the A team in Bulgaria. So the Qataris basically went and like bought these, brought these guys to Qatar, gave them temporary passports, and they competed for Qatar. And this was working. They were winning gold medals at the Olympics, which they had never done before. And so it was this kind of industrial scale operation in all sorts of ways. Some of it you could argue was humorous. What we discovered, we knew about some obviously before we went there, but really discovered in troubling detail when we went both there and to Nepal, was that so after they won the right to host the World Cup, they had to construct stadiums. You can imagine for the World Cup, I think FIFA requires something like 8 to 12 world-class stadiums. So they had to start from scratch building these. The vast majority of the manual labor in Qatar is done by like guest workers, basically, who they bring in. There's about 2 million people who live in the country, but only 250,000 of them are citizens. The other 1.75 million, and my numbers may be like a little off now, but it's roughly this, are what you call guest workers. So they can live there, but they're not entitled to all the benefits of citizenship, which is like cradle to grave money from the state. And so they were going to like some of the poorest places on earth, most notably Nepal, where we went to basically recruit Nepalese who, the standard of living there was like $200 a year. I mean, just extraordinary poverty. I've never seen anything like it. And saying, hey, do you want to come to Qatar and help build the stadiums? And a lot of them did for obvious reasons. And a lot of them died because the conditions were so brutal. Working in this heat, the protections in place for the workers were were minimal, and and they couldn't leave the country. They had at the time this kafala system where you go to the country and you're like sponsored by a company, and you can't just get up and leave. So anyway, that was a way too long answer to your question. I'm very sorry.
That was great. Talking more about Qatar, I mean, I was listening to everything you said. So one thing I saw in your recording is for every citizen, there's about 5 of these migrant workers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the number. So it kind of adds up to exactly what you're saying. And I was reading about the awful conditions, and, in the video highlighted 8 people in a room, toilet water for showers, like 600 people for kitchens, the heat. It was super interesting. And I think the takeaway for me after watching everything was how important and how much power money can give you. And you look at a country like Qatar, who was really looking for world appreciation and respect and saw sport as an avenue to get there. It seemed as if they had no restraints on the type of things they would do with the money that they had. So talking more about that, you mentioned FIFA briefly and how that FIFA World Cup bid took place. I'm really curious to hear more about, from your perspective, how Qatar managed to really pull this off.
How did they pull off winning the right to host it?
Yeah.
They basically paid off these FIFA voters. I mean, not basically, literally. I mean, the FIFA has been this almost comically corrupt organization for forever, really, or for a very long time. And there's this executive committee. At the time, there was like 22 members on it, and they were the ones who voted. So you only had to get 12 of these people. They were all men. They might still be all men. I don't know. To vote for your country, and yeah, I mean they went around the world and they offered. They basically bought the votes. I mean, I can't remember like the particulars of each of them. I mean, almost all of those people were subsequently indicted by the U.S. government, and I don't think any of them are currently on FIFA anymore. Which is not to say FIFA has cleaned up its act necessarily, but the people who voted for that are no longer. Yeah, I mean, it was a. I mean, I don't know how much you want to get into these broader issues, but like the international sports. So one of the things I try and talk about in class, and hopefully I've done some of this so far, is sports is this weird place that is kind of run by these like monopoly entities. So unlike, when I was working at HBO, if I didn't like the way they treated me or the salary wasn't good or I didn't like the healthcare plan or any reason, I could try and go work at ESPN or NBC or anything like that, right? Basic, basic competition that we view in a open society as providing some check on the behavior of entities. You don't have that in sports. So, and the international organizations are the best example, right? So there's one entity called the International Olympic Committee. They run all of international sports. There's one entity called FIFA. They run all of soccer. There's no like competing entity to that. So, that's the reason we have like antitrust laws, and the reason that we believe that like a competitive system is a positive is it serves as a check on some of these really troubling behaviors. And so, FIFA became this horribly corrupt enterprise, and that served their own interests at the expense of the people they were supposed to serve. And you see this, all over the world where, they were supposed to be spending money, building soccer fields for, low-income families and, low-income communities or countries in Latin America or Africa or whatever, and they were like pocketing this money. So, feel free to redirect me if I'm going on too long, or if it's too wonky or anything.
Well, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates are three countries in this Gulf that kind of have taken on sports in their own right. Saudi Arabia, I'm particularly aware of through Live Golf, and also through some of the best players that I would be big fans of. I can't necessarily watch easily anymore, and then on soccer as well. Why sport for these countries? What about sports was so important for these countries to kind of want to get in and use their money to? Yeah,
well, the Gulf specifically. I mean, so just stepping back for a minute. I mean, sports have always played this enormous, role as a. Hitler famously used sports and hosted the 1936 Olympics, and Putin has used it in Russia, and so. But I don't know if you were talking more about that, but specifically you are. Okay. Yeah. I mean, sports, they have just a unifying, everyone loves sports, right? It's like there's this sense of, you get all these positive, you saw it even with the World Cup. Like Qatar hosted the World Cup, and it was, yes, there were stories like the one I did and other people did, but, it was the tournament was great. The soccer games were great. Coverage was they got what they wanted, right? They like have a more positive image now than they did. And with Saudi and with the Emirates, it's roughly similar situation, very, very wealthy countries looking to kind of, punch above their weight, so to speak, get more influence in the world. And I think that will be the story of sports in this country for the next 10 or 20 years. I mean, it's kind of coming to us late. Like if you look at what happened in Europe going back over the last 10 or 20 years, the Gulf states started buying pieces of or entirety or buying soccer teams. The Emiratis bought Manchester City, which was kind of a real stepchild to Manchester United, never like a really strong team, poured extraordinary amounts of money on them, and then they, became the dominant team in Europe. The Qataris did it with Paris Saint-Germain. It was kind of a similar dynamic, and the Saudis just did it a couple years ago with Newcastle United. So it's to some degree been going on there for a decade or so. It's just starting here in terms of buying pieces of franchises. The Qataris own a piece now of the Washington Wizards.
And that's how it works in soccer. In soccer, if you purchase a team, you can pour as much money as you want into the team. It's like Manchester City. After they buy the team, there's no cap on the amount of money they spend to get players.
So I'm not an expert on their system. I mean, I think the short answer is basically yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's, it's much more similar, say, to like baseball in the U.S. where there's no salary cap. So, and so you have, I mean, in European soccer, there's a huge difference between the haves and the have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
There's none of the like parity that we have, for instance, in the NFL
Sure.
or the NBA or the NHL, where there's a salary cap of some sort that keeps that. And so you have, like 4, 5, 6 teams that dominate constantly in Europe, and it's in the same way to some degree, like how the Yankees or the Dodgers are consistently the best teams in baseball.
Sure, it's fascinating to see how much money can do things. I was watching with the report how Qatar's plans to make artificial clouds to put over stadiums to protect the heat. It's crazy. For me, it's fascinating to look at how the extent people will go to make their country even suitable for sporting matches when, just shortly ago, there was not even a stadium.
Yeah, I don't think they ended up using that artificial cloud, but it was funny. It was their own video, so we were happy to use it in the piece. I mean, the Saudis are the big players in sports at this point. There's no doubt about it. And, these are... authoritarian countries, women are, not equal citizens anywhere close. There's no democracy. There's no, so, this is a way to, kind of, tidy up the image or, improve the image of these countries. And, for a long time, Saudi was known for just, being this repressive state that, killed and dismembered a journalist and the Khashoggi, and, women couldn't drive, and women needed to have a male chaperone approve their marriage, and I mean, all sorts of, terrible stuff. And, now you go to Newcastle in England, and, the Saudis have invested a ton of money in their team, and the views in Newcastle on Saudi Arabia now are much more positive than they were before they bought the team.
Talking about accountability, you mentioned how sports kind of have nothing to hold them accountable, and one thing you mentioned is through reading, I read through your syllabus actually, and you spoke about how journalism is a really important check for a lot of these organizations, and it's kind of one of the only things that can, in a way, serve as a check. Can you speak more about the importance of journalism for the international sports landscape and how it can keep organizations, teams accountable?
That's been my view, or I don't know if it's the only thing, but it's historically played an important role. And if you look at, the information about, baseball and steroids, or concussions in football, or abuse and gymnastics, sexual abuse in gymnastics, these stories came out because of investigative reporters. There's obviously no incentive, or very little incentive, for the organizations themselves to sort of air their dirty laundry, so to speak. And, there's the legal system, but not everything rises to a law violation, but is still troubling and societally important. So, I have been concerned, and I wrote a piece in Columbia Journalism Review about some of the changes in sports journalism that I have been concerned about. The show I worked on for 20 years, HBO Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel, ended. ESPN got rid of their weekly Outside the Lines program. The New York Times got rid of their sports department. And so a lot of and Sports Illustrated kind of has shrunk significantly. These were traditionally like 4 very big players in investigative sports journalism. And so, I'm concerned about, as there's less of that, there's less of a check on these organizations, and that's not good. That said, there's a lot of exciting new models. We had in class today Pablo Torre, who has a successful investigative podcast, and so it's by no means hopeless, but I'm concerned that, and I think there needs to be more of it.
What do you think some of the solutions to this issue are?
Which issue?
The issue of having a lot of these big players kind of
Go away.
go away.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've thought about. I mean, so what Pablo argued today in class was these independent models. So people, doing Substack and things like that, which have been quite, a lot of them have been quite successful. The problem with some of that is, it's investigative reporting is hard and it takes time, and so it's kind of hard to do on your own because you kind of need an institution supporting you, because a lot of the time you're not creating anything. I mean, it could take you 4, 5, 6 months to do a story. Nobody's going to subscribe to your Substack if you publish something every 6 months. Yeah. So, and that's why like institutions like the New York Times tend to dominate like the awards, like the journalism awards. One thing that I've thought about and have been trying to do something about, there's in journalism, there's this kind of growing nonprofit sector of the journalism marketplace, if you will. So traditionally, newspapers were a successful business. That's basically changed That has changed dramatically, and so some philanthropic organizations have moved in to try and fill that hole. The most well known of this is something called ProPublica, and so I've been arguing for and trying to get off the ground, to be honest, something that would be kind of like a sports version of that I think could play an important role in this landscape.
I also read about Hunter Brook.
Yeah.
What exactly is Hunter Brook?
Yeah. Well, they are also a new model, and I don't know if anyone else is doing what they're doing, but they are funding they're basically and you want to check this, right? Because I'm not an expert on this, but I think they basically have like two parts of their company. Like one part is like just a hedge fund basically, and the other is a newsroom. And the newsroom investigates things using public information, right? So because you can't trade on non-public information, and then the hedge fund side of it gets first crack at, basically sees the story in advance. And so then they can they can short these companies basically. Like if the investigative reporters see that, some company is, spiking the milk or something, and then the hedge fund traders can short that stock. It's an interesting idea. It's so new that it's hard to know how successful it will be. But it is an interesting idea.
Yeah, with the profitability of sports journalism and kind of money is interesting because, in a way, if there's too much money involved in investigative sports journalism, does it make it almost not an even playing field anymore? Let's say you're a journalist and there's money involved. Are you less inclined to do certain stories that have no money?
Right. Well, I think there's like I think that's maybe been one of the criticisms of this organization. I mean, so journalism is hard. It takes time. Like, I mean, any model that exists that funds it is probably a good thing. And so, or, not saying anything, but we need more of it, right? So like if an entity like Hunter Brook is only focusing on stories that their hedge fund traders can monetize, I mean, we wouldn't want all media being that way, but maybe that organization itself being that way is okay as long as there's other people doing other kinds of stories. But the kind of famous example was like ABC News not wanting to run. This is not exactly what you're talking about, but maybe similar enough that Walt Disney Company owns ABC and ABC News, and there was a famous case where ABC News was going to do an investigation on the Disney Company, and then I think they basically didn't run it because it was not in the interests of the broader organization. And I don't know if that's what you were sort of.
No, it is. It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, so that's like obviously a fascinating issue, right? Like, what's in the And all of the, so on the for-profit side, the New York Times is a company, they want to make money, so they are making editorial decisions in part on what they think will help them make money. Now their brand, the thing they're selling is, accurate, robust, rigorous reporting. So the incentives are good in that regard. But, all news organizations are making decisions. All the for-profit ones, anyway, are making decisions in part on their bottom lines. But yes, there's a big continuum on this.
Yeah.
A very big continuum.
Moving a little bit to fake news. It's it's unfortunate that we live in an era that fake news is even a topic of discussion, but it probably always has been in its own respect. But I always coin the people I scroll like on Instagram or TikTok and see them reporting. I always like coin them as like couch journalists. They're at home and they're making videos and they're making content. But if they build up enough of an audience, let's say somebody reports on politics for 2 years and build up 150,000 followers, they in a way create a reputation that they're a reliable source of media, but they also don't have the access that maybe an investigative journalist could have had in the past. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on social media and how it's affected the space.
Yeah, man, I don't know. Well, I feel like there's at least two key things in that question. One is like the access question, and then the other is like kind of who gets to call themselves a journalist or what is journalism. Is that a fair?
Yeah, no, that is fair. That's fair.
So yeah, in theory, anyone can do that. You don't have to pass the bar exam or pass, get a medical degree to be a journalist, right? Anyone can, in theory, do it. But there are a series of standards and ways in which report, like the value of journalism to a free society. The reason it's the First Amendment, et cetera, is providing accurate information so the public can make decisions. So, if someone is doing political reporting, on Substack or on Instagram, if it's well reported, well checked, that's journalism.
Yeah.
If it's just someone popping off with their opinions, that's not journalism. In terms of the access part, yeah, yes, you would have an issue potentially with access, I guess, if that's why it helps to be part of larger organizations.
During your career, what type of stories do you look for when you get started on work? All these projects, like Qatar, for example, it's a huge project.
Yeah.
How do you decide to get started? How do you know something's big enough or important enough to look into?
So that's a really good question. For me, it's usually something that seems like off or wrong or doesn't add up, like something that seems like problematic in some way, something that's like impacting people and probably shouldn't be that way. Now, you start with like maybe a working hypothesis, a working thesis, and then you report on it, and a lot of things don't pan out. Maybe most things don't pan out, right? So, the bar is very high. Like then you have to report it and see like does this add up? I showed a piece in class I think last week about student athlete post college medical care. And I think I did this maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So there have been a few changes since then. But, I remember, athlete get, especially in football, which is a, dangerous sport, tons of injuries in football. You'd see these players who would get injured and would have medical needs post college and didn't go to the NFL. This was not an infrequent occurrence for obvious reasons that don't even need to be explained. Anything from issues like orthopedic issues with head injuries, concussions, etc. And the NCAA had no requirement that a school cover its athletes medically post college. And I was like, when I heard about this, I'm like, there's no way that's true. Like, there's no way, like that's impossible. But people, who I would talk to who knew this, they're like, no, it's true. And so like that is like, okay, that doesn't make sense, right? Especially at these big schools. You're this is before NIL, so this is before student athletes could monetize their labor in any way. But these big schools, like in that piece, we interviewed someone, University of Washington, right? Huge football program, brought in $100 million a year. Guy gets injured playing football, in a game, and he's stuck with the medical bills afterwards. Like, really? Like,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, and so things like, and then Qatar, obviously, for all the reasons I just said, like, how did they win? So something that kind of like, is that right? That doesn't make sense, or that seems troubling. That seems like there's an abuse of power here. Here's things like that. I don't know if that answers your question.
So something happened. Let's say there's a moment that seems off. Qatar
Yeah.
is hosting the World Cup. A lot of people get concussions in football, but it doesn't seem like it seems like they're underreported or something pops up.
Yeah.
What's the next step? Is the next step, or you said form a hypothesis and then begin doing research? You have to get funding? Like how?
Well,
how does that
again,
go?
this is why this is kind of gets to what we talked about a few minutes ago about investigative sports journalism and how it helps to be within an organization. So like for 20 years, I worked at HBO, so I was on salary. So I would go to my boss and say, I'd like some time to look into this, and then, I could get the time to do it. It's harder to do on your own. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's harder to do. There's ways to get grants. There's a lot of, again, because the philanthropic sector has something called Press Forward. There's a lot of money, or a fair amount of money, going to support journalism from the nonprofit sector, from the philanthropic community at this point, because it's clear that the deterioration in the amount of reliable news, is having a negative impact, societally, and so there's ways to get grants for those kinds of things, but it's hard. I mean, that's why there's not a lot of it.
So then when you start making the hypothesis, let's say like going back to Qatar, it's like, all right, this is something.
Yeah.
Is the next step? Like, all right, like for example, we're gonna go to Qatar.
No.
Like, how does that?
No. That's like the end of it, basically. Like, first you just start reading everything you can find. So you just start like trying to get a handle on what's out there, and you can learn a lot from just like consuming a ton of information. And because you're processing it through the lens of the story you're looking at, right? So there could be some. I'm guessing when I was doing that Qatar story, I can't remember all this, but there probably was some glowing profile of the Bulgarian weightlifters who won medals at the Olympics, written in isn't this magnificent, and the country celebrate. Like, not an ounce of skepticism in the article, but that's fine. Like, that's useful for my purposes, if that makes sense. So, there were websites out there about, like some of these naturalized athletes. So I'd say that's the first step. You just like read a lot, and then you start trying to find like really smart people who can help you, who know something about this, who don't seem to be biased, right? Who don't have a so like with human rights stories, there's and this can be a little tricky, but there's human rights organizations, something called Human Rights Watch. There's Amnesty International. They issue reports on these issues. They have experts who you can talk to. Now they have a point of view, but they have spent a fair amount of time looking at these things. And then there's like official or quasi-official government reports or experts. So whether it's the UN or the European Union, there's some issues now in the U.S., but for a long time, for instance, like the State Department human rights reports were great resources. So I'm sure for that story I read, every year the State Department put out a human rights report about each country. And I'm sure I read those like cover to cover for Qatar for the last, 10 years or whatever.
So you find all the information you can.
Yes.
You find people who are not biased and you can work with on the project, and then
and then you're kind of like murder boarding your idea, right? You're like seeing, does it withstand scrutiny, and what else am I learning? And usually then I would do like some sort of summary document, both for myself and for the guy who ran the show, for my boss, so that, because you can end up with these like research like documents that are 50, 100 pages, like super long. You're throwing lots of things in there. And then you're like, okay, well, what are the, like, what have I found so far? Like, and sometimes that's like, you can summarize in like 5, 8 bullets or something, or maybe you write a few pages to help crystallize your thinking. And then you're like, okay, I think these are the angles that this story seems to hold up. And, I think these are the angles we want to explore, right? So with the Qatar story, for example, there were 3 angles. There was the naturalization of athletes, there was the winning the right to host the World Cup, and there was the laborers issue, right? And so we want to tell, those are like going to be our 3 sections. Okay, so how are we going to tell those? And then, to some degree, that's finding what are often called characters, like who are we going to interview whose first person story speaks to the larger point, if that makes sense. So, for the, I could go into it more.
No, yeah, please do.
Okay.
Yeah, please do.
So like, for the naturalization of athletes, like there was a track coach who had been in Qatar and had been the Qatari track coach and was asked to like basically naturalize all these athletes. So, he was a natural guy to go to, reached out to him. He was willing to talk. A lot of times you reach out to people, they don't want to talk, but he was willing to do it. I think I told you about the Bulgarian weightlifters. They seemed like an obvious storyline. So I hired a guy in Bulgaria to reach out to those guys, and then he got them on the phone, and I did like a pre-interview with them. And I'm like, okay, this will work. And then, I'm like, okay, we have that, and then once you kind of have like how you think you want to tell the story, then you go and you shoot it. But the shooting is like towards the end of you still have to write it when you come back and edit it. But the shooting is deep into the project. It's.
Yeah. You briefly just talked about some of these interviews. The question I kind of always have with interviews, especially like with these stories, some of these stories are, really big news, and they're, it's investigative reporting for a reason. It highlights something that, needs to be reported, wrongdoings by somebody or something. How do you get people to accept interviews when sometimes, like, I forget the person's name in Qatar, but they sit down and I'm like, how did this person even get to this part?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I remember asking this to Bob Woodward randomly, the guy who broke Watergate. I met him once, and I said, like, how do you get people to talk? And he's like, people like to talk. I always remember that. It's just like, I don't know, not a terrible answer. But, I don't know. I mean, like, a lot of people say no. Probably more people say no than say yes. But that's fine. So it's, the job itself is like, like people say no, and then you work, okay. And then, your reputation can help that you're going to tell a story fairly. The show or the program or the publication you work for's reputation can help. We had Jodie Cantor visit our class earlier this semester. She's the New York Times reporter who broke the Weinstein story and she wrote the book She Said, which became a film. And, she talked about getting some of those women to talk on the record about Harvey Weinstein. And, like it's the same kind of thing. Lots of them said no, and you kind of keep at it. I mean, some people, you're not going to get to say yes, and you fish or cut bait, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's a persistence component to it, though, and an honesty kind of. I don't know if that answers.
It does. I assume there's a best person for an interview, but if the best person says no, there's like maybe 5 or 6 other people that kind of serve that same role. Maybe at a smaller.
Potentially. So like when we were just talking about earlier for the post-college medical care issue, in theory, there's a lot of people who we could have gone to for that, right? So to some degree, I probably talked to, I think, like a number of athletes for that story to kind of hear their story, and then I could kind of make a decision on they were maybe incentivized to talk, so that's not a particularly difficult booking, so to speak. Although not easy either, because people are private, or some people are private anyway. People usually I don't really know. Like, there's no like great. I don't know. How do you get people to talk on your podcast?
I reach out, just like you mentioned. I reach
ask.
out. I ask questions. Like you mentioned, you can get no's, obviously.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're gonna like the more people you reach out to, the more guests you have.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And
And like you mentioned before, typically what helps is that you build a brand reputation. So the more episodes we do,
Right.
the better it gets. So for example, the summer we interviewed the founder of Twitch. That was our biggest episode we ever did. Before that, I would say it was very hard to get guests. Typically what I'll do now is when I reach out to guests, maybe I'll drop the link to that episode in there
Yep.
so they at least know, okay, this is the legit podcast.
Yep.
This is not.
We would do the same thing. We'd send them a piece, that hopefully showed the way we work. Have you tried yet to get someone where the questions would potentially be like an accountability kind of thing where someone maybe wouldn't want to talk because they've allegedly done something improper or
No, not yet.
okay.
And that's
Those are the harder ones to
those
get
are the harder
usually.
ones.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I want you to speak about something that may not be.
Yeah. Now, some people want the opportunity. They feel like they've been unfairly maligned, or
Yeah.
or maybe there's a piece of their what is out there broadly that they think is wrong, and they want to clear up. And so people often appreciate the opportunity, especially with podcasts like this. It goes on for a while. You can really fully tell the story you're looking to tell.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a gray area sometimes, it seems, when it comes to like what exactly is correct, ethically correct in journalism. For example, one thing I watched in the report, there was a video of I guess the Nigerian representative of FIFA.
Yeah.
And they captured them basically admitting, hey, I'll give you my vote if you give me a certain amount of money. Like, how do those things happen? And how do you get that information? And then also, like, obviously this is a big deal, so this type of information is important, but also it seems like that's a gray area in many situations most people wouldn't think to even do. Like,
yeah, so that video came from, and it's a really good question, and actually this example is a fascinating one to this exact ethical question. So a couple reporters from the Sunday London Times were looking into, I don't know, as I said earlier, like England was vying for the World Cup as well. And so they were investigating FIFA basically and how FIFA was operating. And they went undercover and posed as, I can't remember what they posed as, but basically I think they posed as like representatives of the American bid. Like they reached out to these FIFA members and said, hey, I'm affiliated with, I think it was the American bid, and I'd like to meet with you. And then they would basically like offer them money and see how they would respond. And that's where that video came from.
wow.
Now, should the reporters have done that? I don't know. I mean, like, there's a lot of value to that information.
Yeah.
I don't think. I guess I think the public value of that information outweighs any of the issues with how it was obtained. But obviously, reasonable people can disagree on this.
Off the Leash podcast is brought to you by Skinletics. Now listen, if you've never used light therapy before, you should have started yesterday. But the good thing is there's still lots of time. It is the best thing for you recovery-wise. If you're an athlete and you like working out, it really helps reduce inflammation. And if you're somebody who just cares about their health and well-being, they have a face mask that's really good for anti-aging and anti-acne properties. I'm gonna put the link in the description. On top of all of that, they make amazing apparel as I'm sporting right now. Listen, if you watch our podcast, if you're a part of the OTL community, you gotta tap into Skinletics. Go ahead, check it out. Hope you enjoy. Let's get back to the episode.
But you just mentioned the point of the public value, outweighing anything else. That's interesting. And I think that makes sense to me. I don't know. The problem is everyone probably has a different understanding of what the public value is to a story. This one specifically, it seems like it needed to happen. So let's say, you're doing a report on Ivy League athletics, and the value in your mind because how important the Ivy League is, like, to your belief. So you're willing to go to further lens of, getting some undercover information. What do you think that gray area is?
In terms of getting the information, I mean,
Yeah.
I actually don't find these ethical things to be insanely hard. Like the true north, like the North Star or whatever, is that you're serving the public. Like that's who you work for, like literally, or not literally, but that's the hope. That's the point of journalism. So, if So, if there's if an Ivy League coach is abusing his or her athletes and treating them poorly, and I had to sneak into the the workout room to see it, like that's but push back. I don't know. What do
No,
you think?
I think that makes sense. It's tough because
And we talked about this in class. Actually, we shoot. There's this very famous example called Food Lion, which is
okay,
basically ABC News had these reporters go work for a company called Food Lion. It's a
grocery store.
grocery stores, exactly. Yeah, and they documented really troubling, like the way the food was treated, like important stuff that. But they did it they were not straight when they applied for jobs. They didn't say they were journalists. They said they were, just local. They made up their resumes. I mean, it was a pretty elaborate ruse. And that's more. There's the legal question, and then there's like the ethical question. So there's different but related. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is if it's legally okay.
Well, not anything. I mean, there's a line. I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely a line. But yeah, I mean, trying to think of a good example to illustrate this. Let's see. I don't know. Maybe the Qatar thing's not a bad example. So the guy who talked to us for that, the guy from the Aspire Academy. So, it's this big complex that trains athletes and in Qatar, and I think they found out we were in the country, and they sent us a note. They sent me an email. Like I think there was an NFL player that was coming, and they wanted to see if we wanted to cover it, and if we wanted to interview the head of the academy. And I responded with, I would like to interview him about Qatari sports in general, something like that. So it was clear that I didn't want to just interview him about the visit of this NFL player. Now, when he read that, may not have thought, or his assistant may not have thought, oh, they're going to ask a bunch of tough questions about laborers and stuff. But I said we want to talk to you about Qatari sports in general. That is what we talked to him about.
Yeah.
Did he likely have? I don't know. But what do you think? I mean, this is like the kind of thing that anyone curious what you think.
It's tough because I think everything you just explained makes a lot of sense to me. It's like we're talking about Qatari sports. If you do an interview about Qatari sports and you just ask tough questions, that's Qatari sports. It's just the unfortunate things that happen in Qatari sports. It's kind of like it's important. The random example you just made up of if there's an Ivy League coach who's potentially abusing players and you have to go in the weight room to see it. If you go into the weight room to have to see it and report important information, for me it seems okay. It's just, I asked that question, I bring it up because I know in my head like there's surely a line, but at the same time, what I foresee as an issue is someone's important story is someone else's not important story.
For sure. I mean, that's why it's like, so a couple things. You're weighing the public value of the information, right? So as the public value goes up, then your maybe comfort with doing some of these things, rises, right? If the public value is very little, like, oh, I want to, then that wouldn't justify, at least to me, doing some of these things. You have to, I mean, to do responsible journalism in my eyes anyway, not to be like all like highfalutin about it, but you have to hold yourself to a high standard, like, but you're right, different people can disagree on that. I mean, it's not the law, right? Like, so that, nobody's going to go to, you're not putting people in jail and et cetera. So, but you're right. There is a, people are making judgments, and those different people will have different opinions of those judgments, which is why, by the way, it's healthy to have a robust press because, I grew up in Chicago. There used to be like, 2, really 3 or 4, counting the suburban papers, like newspapers in the town. Now it's shrunk a lot. So it's like good to have that competition, people, operating in slightly different ways or with different standards.
Yeah. I think your point about public value resonates with me. I think I can that's a good takeaway for myself. Like, I think public value, maybe, I think is tangible. Like, all right, this has more public value than this. I think that's a fair argument to make for many topics. I think about college football always. And a cheating scandal for a program paying before NIL existed, let's say a cheating scandal at the University of Kentucky basketball is probably a bigger deal than, let's say, if it was taking place at Tufts University at a D3 level, just in the sense of Kentucky's bringing in tons of more money. They're competing for national championships at the Division I level in March Madness. So publicly, it probably holds more value to viewers and fans of the sport, and are going to feel more hurt and whatever than if it happened at Tufts.
Yeah, although not to complicate the example, but there are a lot of people who probably would feel like, and this, before, like you said, before NIL, before athletes could monetize their labor, that those athletes should be paid. Like they're, Kentucky basketball is generating, north of $100 million a year.
Yeah.
And so, you could say there's some, anyway.
Yeah. There's probably something, no, that's exactly the point. There's probably that to everything. So I guess the next question I'll have about journalism. Journalism is
which is what, actually, just one interesting point, potentially interesting to me anyway. Which is why that I was excited to teach this class at Yale, because, I think it's important to have like really smart, well-trained people doing this kind of work,
Mm-hmm.
and it turns out there's a lot of smart people at Yale. So, who knew? So yeah, I was excited. Like, I kind of designed this class, and then I was excited they went for it, because I'm like, okay, I can be with and who knows if any of these people in the class, any of the students in the class will go on to be journalists, much less sports and journalists, much less investigative sports journalists. But at least I felt like it's kind of helping seed the ground, so to speak, about the importance of this work, the way to think about it. And so,
this is your first time teaching it?
Yeah.
Were you at Penn State?
No, I'm also a professional in residence this semester at Penn State.
Okay.
So I'm doing both things.
Traveling back and forth?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It's a lot. Yeah.
That sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Well, the next point in question I want to quickly hear your thoughts about. You talked a lot about gathering information, and one thing I read throughout your entire syllabus was a lot of places you can gather information that I never even heard of. I did not know a lot of these things are publicly available. Can you talk about some of like the most common places that maybe no one knew about that you can easily look up information about? Let's say a university, for example.
Well, my favorite example, I might have used this in the first class or hopefully early in the semester. The Department of Education has something called the Equity EADA Cutting Tool. It's like, I forget exactly what it stands for, but basically the government collects data on all of the teams at any school that gets public funding, which is like every school. And so the total revenue you can look up, and we did it in class, like, how much does the Yale football team bring in? How much does the Yale, basketball team bring in?
Public knowledge.
It's public record, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's great.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
I recommend it.
I could go home and search all that up.
Yes, you could see how much the school is making in revenue from football, and you can compare it to other schools. So, like a school like Michigan is generating like $200 million a year from football.
Mm-hmm.
Yale's probably, I don't know, I can't remember, 20 or 30 million or something. Maybe it's less than that, but maybe it's like 9 or 10 million. But
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Super interesting.
So there's tons of places you can get information.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one example. Yeah, I mean, like lawsuits are great. I don't want you to have to like take the class here, but we talked about open records, filing open records requests. Some of this stuff gets a little geeky, but once you get, hopefully, what I've tried to do, you can ask the students, I don't know how successful I've been, it's like a little bit like a detective, and it can be like a really fun, exciting process to like find stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I've tried at least to to see if I can incubate some of that. But.
What's been the favorite story that you've done?
I don't know. I mean, that Qatar story was cool. Like it had a lot going for it. I mean, going in Nepal to these like desperately poor places was like, it was the most interesting place I've ever been.
In Nepal.
Yeah, like southern Nepal, like far from Kathmandu. Like you have to fly on these small planes to get there, and like just incredible poverty, and but also just obviously like very interesting for
Mm-hmm.
for what I think are obvious reasons. So I did a story. I spent like a year on a story about the International Olympic Committee along with several colleagues, and that was very interesting. I did a lot of reporting in Russia, which is a fascinating place. But I did a lot of student athlete issues, which I continue to find interesting, and I think there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. You just talked about Nepal a little bit. I'm curious to hear through your experience, not just what you're reporting, kind of like off of what you're posting. You surely have learned a lot just about the world and have some key takeaways in your own life about what you've seen through your career. What are some like the biggest things you may have learned about maybe the way the world operates or some? So it's a pretty deep question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's a big question, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear some of the things you've learned. You've been in places people have never been before. You've been in the poorest areas of Nepal. You've been to Qatar, places that I probably would never even end up. What are some things you've learned from these experiences?
Well, maybe I'll stick a little bit with sports because it's
Cool.
it's to the extent I have some expertise. It's in that space.
Great.
Well, a few things. Because sports are so enjoyable and because people like them so much and they bring people together and they have, all these like, wonderful positive qualities. What to me is troubling is how people can abuse that. Like people can use that. I mean, you see this to some degree with like cities and, having to like pay a lot of money to keep like an NFL team or something, like the NFL will keep a team in a city, but the public will have to pay a lot of money. And there's a kind of a, or some of these sports washing issues that we've talked about before. Like there's an emotional grip of sports, emotional power sports that can be bastardized, misused, abused, can be like really, to some degree, like anything else we have an emotional attachment to, right? Like there's, but it can be really troubling and kind of gross, right? Like, and that I think is part of what drew me to this kind of work. I grew up like a huge Chicago Bears fan and Cubs, just like a huge sports fan. I still am a fan, but like seeing some of the ways in which these like institutions that I loved, these teams that I loved, or these organizations that I loved, were really not operating in the public's interest, kind of like to some degree like abusing my love of them. I found that, I continue to find that deeply troubling and kind of wrong. And so I don't know if that answers
It does.
question.
And that is one thing the last thing I probably want to talk about is that I wanted to talk about it earlier. I'm actually going to bring it up because it's a really interesting topic that I saw that you have a lot of work on it, that you have some expertise about sports teams. Kind of the one specific I had was like taxpayers losing billions of dollars to stadium projects, sports owners using their team to avoid taxes, political donations. There's a lot of things that are under wraps that the average person like me doesn't ever know about. So you just talked about a sports team being in a city, and maybe it's a poor city, and taking their money. Like, please educate me more on this. I'm curious to hear about it.
Well, it's a big topic, and but the leagues all have the leagues are all more or less monopolies. Maybe they don't legally meet those, but there's only like one entity that is does professional football in this country. There's only one entity that does professional basketball. I mean, sometimes there's these like little minor leagues that pop up, but they're not competitive in any way. So so the four major leagues, NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, they all basically like control their respective markets, right? So, and there's a huge scarcity. Like there's 32 NFL teams. There's probably 100 cities in this country that would like and could support an NFL team. In fact, a lot of the cities that have NFL teams are like like the 80th biggest city in the country. Not just Green Bay, but like other cities that have teams are not like like among the 32 biggest teams, right? So the leagues can kind of play cities off of each other, or owners can. And they would probably deny that they do this.
What do you mean by that? Play off each other?
Well, they can. I mean, you've seen where, like I think the most recent was the San Diego Chargers, the LA Chargers, the most recent team to move. I'm trying to remember.
Las Vegas Raiders, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. That's more recent. That's more recent. That's a great example, right? Like I think I think I have most of these facts were correct, but you might want to check this. But the way I remember it is that, the owners of the Raiders said to the mayor of Oakland and the people of the city of Oakland, like, we want a new stadium. We want you to basically like pay to build us a new stadium. And the city said, we're not going to do it. We're a poor city. We can hardly pay for like, the basic services for our, vulnerable communities, and we're not going to do it. And so the team moved, they found another city that would do it. And I think, at Raiders Stadium I think there's like $1 billion in public money. It's either Las Vegas city money or state money or county money.
That causes a huge spike in tax dollars. Is that kind of how that works? Like how does the city fund a stadium project? Like Oakland, if Oakland was to fund this project, how would...
I mean, if they wanted to do it, they could have issued bonds and, but it would have come at the expense of, I think the city would argue that it would have come at the expense of city services. So the cities can issue debt, so they can, but it's, it basically is tax money. You can you in effect increase taxes, or you lower your expenditures on other things, and so
just to build a stadium.
Yeah, and so. Yeah, I think that's like an area, kind of in some ways like an underreported area. My understanding is this is like unique to North America. If you look at Europe and, those stadiums are largely funded by the team owners themselves, and they last much longer. Here you're seeing like new stadiums every like 25 years. There was the Falcons in Atlanta had a new stadium, and then the new one opened like 25 years later or something. And the same with like the Texas Rangers baseball team. And whereas like these stadiums in Europe are like last 100 years or something, because like the owner would have to pay to build a new one. So,
You look in the news and there's always a new stadium going up.
Yeah,
it's like,
right, exactly.
Like I saw Buffalo's doing a new
Yeah,
stadium. It's
that's a great example.
It's always new stadiums going on.
Yeah.
Last question for you. I'm curious to hear, what do you think, what are you most excited about for the future of sports journalism? What are you most apprehensive about?
I'm worried about I should have been prepared for that. That's like that should be a layup for me. What the hell? How am I struggling with answering that question? I'm embarrassed. Yeah, I mean, I'm worried about the funding for it. Like there needs to be like a regularized funding model, like a funding stream that's consistent, that's not reliant on the whims of some organization. Or, I mean, a lot of sports journalism was and still is funded by the sports gambling industry. We haven't gotten into that, but that's its own like problem and issue, right? So there needs to be a sustainable, regularized like funding model for investigative sports journalism that can be relied on. The most exciting thing is maybe ironically, like it's not the inverse of that, but like there's so many, I mean, to some degree, it's like easier than ever to do this because, you can just start your own podcast or Substack or something,
Yeah.
So that's good. And and I don't know, like teaching this class has been awesome. Like interested, young, smart people, like excited to like get in the game on this, that's cool. Like that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
probably the most exciting part.
That is exciting. It's exciting for myself. I was like, I can start a podcast.
Yeah.
Let me just pick up a camera
Yeah.
and start recording.
Why don't I do it?
It's crazy. If it was
Yeah.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
when we interviewed the Twitch founder in the summertime, he mentioned that he wanted to basically, in a way, Twitch was a rendition of their idea. They're like, well, we're these smart Yaleys and we have smart conversations all the time. But how do we get people to hear these conversations? They're like, oh, well, we should make a 24/7 live audio stream. Just because this was a time that there was like no like software to even like think of a podcast. So their rendition of it, like, let's just make it an app like Twitch where we can just record our lives so we never miss anything. And now you see, and all you gotta do now is just pick up 2 Canon cameras, 2 mics, and you have a podcast.
Yeah.
It's like, it's crazy, but
You could do it with your phones even.
you can do it with your phones.
Yeah.
You can just talk to the phone. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, overall, thank you so much for this.
Thanks
This was-
for having me.
This
I really
was
appreciate it.
very enjoyable episode. Last thing I always say is subscribe to Off Leash Podcast. And thank you for listening.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.